Angus Taylor, welcome to Insiders.
Thanks for having me, Fran.
Hundreds of thousands of school students were marching and keep on marching because they're worried about the future of the planet. Are you worried?
Well, it's good to see we've got active citizens amongst our kids, and we always encourage that. I don't think it should be at the expense of their education. But look, the point here, Fran, is that we are taking strong action, and we need to take strong action. This has to be globally coordinated. We have to do our bit as part of that. We'll overachieve on our 2020 obligations as we overachieved on our 2012 obligations, and we've laid out to the last tonne how we'll achieve on our 2030 obligations.
Just let me interrupt you there, Minister, because you've said this many times now, but the facts are, and these are facts coming from the government's own numbers, is that emissions are going up in Australia, not down. So how are we going to overachieve, as you say? We're going in the wrong direction.
Now, we can cherry-pick time periods. We've had reductions in two of the last...
periods for a year.
Well, we have had reductions in two of the last three quarters. It's true that over the last year there's been a 0.6% increase, and that's more than attributable to our gas exports, which are reducing emissions in China and South Korea and Japan. But, Fran, the point that really matters here is that this has to be globally coordinated action, and Australia needs to do its bit, and we are. That is what really counts here, and delivering. And as I said, we'll deliver on our 2012 obligations, not by a little bit, but by 367 million tonnes, which is a stunning overachievement, and one for which all Australians should be given great credit.
Just to go to these figures again, though, how are we delivering if transport's emissions for the last year are up 10%, industry emissions are up 10%, fugitive emissions are up 45%? Where is the sign that we are cutting emissions?
Well, Fran, if you exclude gas exports over the last
why would we
recent
exclude
years,
them? Were you planning on phasing them out?
Because, frankly, they are reducing emissions in our customer countries, in South Korea, Japan, and China, of course, which is a very
Minister.
big...
If our gas exports are reducing emissions in other countries, what about our coal exports? Are they increasing them?
Well, the growth has been in our gas exports. Look, we've gone from having
We are the world's second biggest coal exporter, aren't we?
Can I finish? We have gone from an industry which didn't exist a few short years ago that is now the biggest in the world, our LNG export industry. Now, we wear emissions from fugitives and from the compression of the gas, which requires a great deal of energy, and the reductions, which are the equivalent of up to 28% of our domestic annual emissions, are gained by Japan, by South Korea and China.
But if you can count those, then why aren't you also counting the impact on emissions of our coal exports?
Because the growth has been in LNG exports. Look, and the really important point here, if you take a step back from this, we can cherry-pick time periods and sectors.
Emissions have gone up over the last 4 years, haven't they?
Hang on. But what counts is our international obligations. That's what counts. We entered into a commitment for Kyoto for 2012, which we beat. We entered into a commitment under Kyoto for 2020, which we will beat by 367 million tonnes. We've entered into a commitment under the Paris Agreement for 2030, and we've laid out to the last tonne how we're going to achieve that 12 years ahead of time. No government has laid that out so far ahead. The Climate Solutions Package, $3.5 billion, which is targeting 328 million tonnes of reductions. OK,
let's go to the global position, because these school kids are really just reinforcing the message and the concerns of our neighbours in the Pacific. Some of those leaders are in New York now, arguing for change. Our Prime Minister at the recent Pacific Island Forum signed up to a statement that agreed there was a climate crisis facing the Pacific and that noted urgent action was needed to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. We signed that. How are we doing our part beyond 2030? How are we going to get to zero emissions by 2050, which is what's needed to keep warming to 1.5 degrees?
Well, let's look at it in two time periods. The first time period to get to 2050 is the practical one ahead of us is 2030.
And you keep saying we're going to reach that in a canter. Next year you're going to have to lay out the next plan, aren't you?
Well, no, we've laid out the 2030 plan.
No, but beyond that.
Beyond that, look, the truth about what has to happen in the medium to longer term, beyond 2030, is R&D and technology have to play a crucial role. We still don't know globally exactly how we can reduce emissions in the steel industry, in aluminium, in agriculture, in transport, but we do need to invest in technologies. We're investing $140 million in hydrogen. We know hydrogen has the potential to play a really crucial role. Biofuels, sequestration. I mean, these are technologies that offer us real potential. They are the technologies that can provide us the pathways, and we're making significant investments where Australia has the potential to do so. Hydrogen is obviously one, given our status as a big gas exporter now, where we can play a very significant role.
OK, you're talking about investment, though. Business wants rules to guide their investment in new generation, rules around the emissions. You're the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Why won't the government recommit to the NEG, the National Energy Guarantee, which is all about putting rules to bring in emissions? Because business wants you to, the states want you to, even the opposition says it'll back it straight away.
Well, Fran, the opposition called it a Frankenstein policy, so that's sort of odd that they would take that view. But let's talk about the issue, and that's what counts here. There's two parts to the NEG. The retailer reliability obligation.
Yep, that's still in place. But what about rules around emissions?
Let me finish. It went into place from the 1st of July. The second part was a 26% emission reduction target. We will achieve that 9 years ahead of time. There is no debate about this. It is very clear we'll achieve it. Now, the reason is we're seeing record levels of investment in solar and wind. In 2018 alone, we were the highest in the world, almost double the next country, which was Japan on a per capita basis.
Well, let me go to that, because the renewable energy target is due to wind up. The Clean Energy Council has said this month in a report that a lack of federal energy policy certainty and the combination of a range of regulatory challenges mean investment confidence in large-scale renewable energy is fragile, and it says investment in new renewable energy projects has collapsed.
Well, that's not right. I mean, the clean energy regulators informed me this week that just in the last 6 months, the first 6 months of this year, we've seen 1.4 gigawatts, that's 1,400 megawatts of capacity committed. That was more than the whole of 2016. So we're seeing extraordinary investment. The challenge now is this, Fran. The challenge is to make sure investment in our electricity grid is balanced. We need dispatchable power on demand, balancing the intermittent power we're getting from solar and wind. If we don't get that balance right, we won't be able to deliver on a fair value for energy for Australian consumers, households, small businesses and industry. And that balance is now the key. We're reaching our emissions targets way ahead of time. The challenge is the affordability and reliability that is so crucial to jobs, to household budgets and to small business budgets as well.
Let's move on, because the government introduced the so-called Big Stick Divestment Bill this week, which gives the government the power to force energy companies to get rid of assets if they're engaging in anti-competitive behaviour. Do you plan to use that divestment power to force AGL to sell the Liddell coal-fired power station so it can be kept open beyond 2023? Because there's some in your party room who want you to do that.
Well, no, the purpose of the legislation is to make sure we have genuine competition in the electricity market. And the ACCC told us that the situation in electricity was unsustainable and unacceptable.
Absolutely. The ACCC didn't recommend this power, though. But my question is, do you intend to use this power, which you could, to force AGL to divest itself off the Liddell power coal-fired power generator, so you can keep that going?
Just to make the point about the ACCC, the ACCC made clear that we needed to deal with issues like market manipulation, ensuring that there are fair retail margins, that the contract market was competitive.
Sure.
In terms of Liddell, Fran, look, we've put together a task force working closely with the New South Wales Government and AGL. The aim here is very clear. We either need like-for-like replacement or extension. The idea that you can shut major baseload generators prematurely without a clear plan as to what they're going to be replaced with simply doesn't work.
So what does that mean for Liddell?
Well, it means that we're working through that with the New South Wales Government and AGL. But let me tell you, if there is not either extension or like-for-like replacement, then this will be unacceptable, because you will see upward pressure on prices and a loss of reliability, as we saw in South Australia and we saw in Victoria, where major baseload generators were taken out of the market without a plan.
Okay,
now, we have time.
Talking about prices, the energy industry says this legislation will force prices up, not down, because investors will be spooked by the threat of heavy-handed government intervention, that the risk implicit in that. Will these new powers help bring prices down, and by how much?
Well, the energy companies would say that.
But it's not just the energy companies, it's consumers too.
Well, there's a lot of consumers who are very happy to see a more competitive market. And the point I would make is this. If we want lower prices and we want investment, we need a competitive market. People don't want to invest. Investors don't want to put money into a market which is manipulated or distorted. And what we have in this legislation is a conduct being dealt with which is unacceptable. Conduct around distortion of the wholesale market, contract markets, failure to pass on substantial and sustained savings to customers. All of those conducts are being dealt with in this legislation. Conduct which was laid out in the ACCC report as unacceptable and unsustainable.
So how much will this bring prices down?
Well, as I said, we've said before the election, we want to see a substantial reduction in wholesale prices as well as those being passed on to customers. And we've said, depending on the state...
Have you got a figure? Have you got a number?
Well, we said, depending on the state, we want to see prices around that $70 a megawatt hour mark. That's what we want to see the big energy companies working towards, and the smaller players in the industry, Fran.
On another issue, Minister, Labor's been pursuing you in the Parliament over recent months because of a meeting you had with the Department of Environment concerning the EBBC listing of the Monero grasslands. A company called Jamlands, which you and your family have a financial interest in, had a compliance notice served on it for clearing some protected grasslands. Why didn't you declare your interest in Jamlands when you sat down with the department to talk about these laws?
Well, I declared my interest in accordance with the rules, Fran.
But why didn't you think to declare it at that meeting?
Well, I've declared my interest in accordance with the rules. The Minister was fully aware of that.
It's still not declared in your ministerial interest, is it?
Well, it's declared in accordance with the rules, Fran. And the point I would make is that I have stated at arm's length at all times from that compliance matter. But I'll tell you what I have done. I've argued for farmers in my electorate who deserve advocacy and representation on an issue that was affecting them.
But Minister,
that was the right thing to do.
Isn't it true, though, that the company you have a family interest in, Jamlands, is actually the only company with a compliance notice served against it on these issues of grasses?
I have no idea what compliance actions are on foot. I stay away from that and at arm's length. But I tell you what I do, Fran. I advocate for farmers in my electorate, and I will do it every day of the week because they need representation on issues like this and drought and all of those other issues that are hugely important to them.
I understand that, but didn't you think when you were meeting with the department on the broader issue that it would have been fit and proper to tell them that you had a compliance notice against the company you're a member of?
My obligations are to declare my interests to the Parliament and to the Prime Minister, and I did that in accordance with the rules. They're my obligations. Now, I understand the department was fully aware of the issue.
But not because you told them.
Well, my obligation is to disclose to the Parliament and to the Prime Minister. And, of course, the Minister, which was Josh Frydenberg at the time, was also aware. So there was no lack of disclosure and compliance on this, Fran. But I tell you what, farmers need representation, and I will do it every day of the week.
Angus Taylor, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Fran.